Maggie. I'm a licensed clinical psychotherapist with degrees in psychology, theology, and marriage and family therapy, a national certification in dialectical behavioral therapy, and a national certification in integrative mental health. In this video, I'm not looking to diagnose anyone. I'm only willing to offer insight into situations like these. Hello, hello. Welcome to Wednesday. It is Wednesdaying today. It is definitely Wednesdaying. Did you guys know that 70% of people report feeling overwhelmed by suffering at some point in their lives? Like, that's staggering. 70%. That is from the World Health Organization. And today I'm feeling it. I have a terrible headache today. So I'm going to be suffering while talking about suffering. But let's say hello to some people. Adrian is in here first. He says he's here for the dancing Maggies and the information. Thank you for being here, Adrian. And Nina Williams is here saying hi, my favorite auntie. Adra Kapoy with the hashtag PPW for Pivot Point Wednesdays. Hopefully you guys remember a pivot point is something that removes all the mess in a matrix. And Armando is here with the peace sign. Thank you, Adric and Armando, for being here. Appreciate you so much. And Armando, thank you for the Cash App last time. I always see them after the fact. I've got to remember to look. Have to remember to look. So we're going to talk about suffering. And, the whole point is to find meaning in suffering. So, I don't want to have like a pity party show or to talk about how terrible things are. So let's talk about how we find meaning in that suffering, right? So let's talk about what is suffering, just real quick, right? Because most of us know we've suffered, right? So suffering is the experience of physical, emotional, or psychological pain or distress. It can arise from various sources, including illness, trauma, loss, or existential concerns. This is why this applies to Pivot Point. Suffering often involves a sense of helplessness or discomfort and can vary in intensity and duration. So is it just being uncomfortable, right? Like, is it discomfort and pain, or is it a pathway? Is it a way to go deeper? So what if suffering can lead to profound personal growth and a deeper meaning in life? So, as the Dalai Lama said, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional, right? We're all going to feel pain. We're all going to be in pain at some point in time. Somebody's going to hurt our feelings. We're going to stub our toe, or big things happen, systemic things happen. There's going to be pain, right? But suffering is optional. So today we'll dive into how suffering, rather than just being a burden that we carry and we're just consistently suffering all the time, can be more of a transformative experience. Hi, Inspired Truth. He's checking in late. He just saw it, but guess what? We just started. So you are so good. And you're not late. You're here when you get here. And then you're here. So it's all good. Right? Okay. So this is a meme that I like. I've never had a problem that I couldn't make worse. Do any of you guys ever feel like that? It seems like the more you try to mold and shape and fix and do and figure out a problem, the worse it gets. Or like in our avoiding of a problem, in our compartmentalizing the problem, or just plain avoiding it, or You try to get out of a lie with a lie, and then you gotta tell more lies, and so it's like I've never had a problem that I couldn't make worse, if it's a problem. But we are conditioned to view suffering as something that's terrible, and we have to stop it by whatever means necessary. We resist any type of pain or suffering instead of looking at it as information, right? It's a sensory information, the same as smelling something, seeing something, touching something. What pain does, what pain is for, is to say, "Hey, look at this. There's a problem," right? If you're sitting there in a pair of shorts and you feel a sharp pain on your leg, you're immediately attending to that. It's, "Hey, look at this. There's a problem." Okay? So emotional pain is the same. We don't look and watch a mosquito biting us and go, "Well, I guess I'm just gonna have to sit here and let it." Right? Like, we fix it immediately, but for some reason we are conditioned to like endure suffering or just avoid it at all costs. Okay? We tend to exert a lot of wasted energy avoiding the suffering, compartmentalizing the suffering, escaping from the suffering, or just worrying about future suffering, like what's going to happen. And so we have all these psychological things that hinder our personal growth that are all around suffering simply because we won't attend to the pain. Right? We do it when it's a mosquito. Why don't we do it when it's psychological pain? Right? We're not going to attend to it. We're just not doing it. Okay. I've got my notes in front of me, guys. There's a lot of notes today. Why do I keep making these longer and longer and longer? Okay, let's stop. All right. Why do we do that? Cognitive dissonance. I'm always going to bring that up. Cognitive dissonance. Adria Capoy says, "I'll pass. No more suffering." I'm getting back into the matrix. There's suffering in there too. Inspired Truth says, "Stoicism gone wrong." Stoicism's great, but Stoicism never says to avoid suffering. You just attend to suffering differently, right? It's more of you're not attached to the outcome of things, so you're not going to suffer the consequences, right? You do what follows a moral code at any given time, and however people respond, they respond, and whatever happens, happens, right? It's the theory of let them. I'm going to speak the truth. However you respond is on you. If you want to make both of our lives hell, that's on you, right? So I think you can definitely use stoicism because it's a healthy kind of detachment. Hi, Rocky. Thank you for being in here. So why do we do this to ourselves and just make our suffering worse instead of attending to it? So one problem, cognitive dissonance. So this is where we have a deeply firm belief, right, that we view as the truth, okay? And then we learn something or we find out something or we experience something that seems to be totally opposite of our belief, the thing that we think is true. And so we're sitting there holding two things in our mind that both appear to be true and both appear to be incongruent, right? Like they can't exist together. So our brain just starts to go, "Ooh," and we get a lot of psychological discomfort in cognitive dissonance. Okay. So, for example, if you believe that life is happy and fulfilling, then if you encounter like the deep, terrible suffering of someone else, then you're like, How can both of these things be true? And so then we do things like deny that the other person's in pain. I want to hold on to my belief so you're not in pain. Or we minimize it like, oh, they were, they exaggerated that. They're being hyperbolic. They made that look way worse than it is. Or well, they attacked them first. It's we have to like come up with a way to get rid of the new information rather than saying, how can these two things both be true at the same time, even though they seem like they can't? Now, we all experience cognitive dissonance, and it happens like that. And we've reacted and moved on, and we didn't even know that we did it. And so it's all about really being aware of cognitive dissonance. um, Another one is, if you believe, oh, here's a good one. Uh, Corporal punishment of children, right? You can know that children need to be, they might need to be spanked or have their hands smacked if they're reaching for a candle, or be grabbed by the arm if they're going to the street. This is what I'm talking about. Physical punishment. We'll just say physical. Okay. And then you learn a whole bunch of statistics about how mentally that's not great for kids. And then your brain goes, but how do you control their behavior? And what the hell are you supposed to do if they reach for a candle? Well, my mom spanked me. And, your brain starts to do all these things. And oh my gosh, if this is true, does that mean my mom's bad? No, because uh, I got whipped and I'm fine. So, and then so we just sort of like minimize and deny instead of going, well, how can both things be true? There are times when physical punishment or physical control has to be necessary, and it ain't great for brain development. So there has to be like a way to meld things, to work things together. But we do this cognitive dissonance and then just we got to get rid of something because of that suffering that goes on. Adrian Hicks says, I'm just trying to understand why everybody is running around dissonance because of the cognitives. That's why they dissonance. So when we have cognitive dissonance, that pain happens and it's so painful. It's like a psychological mosquito in your brain. Okay, it's boom. And so we deceive, we rationalize, we do anything to get rid of that pain. And it's so fast. It's just like you had a mosquito, you smacked it, you moved on. So you have to be aware of, am I being dismissive? Am I rationalizing things? If I hear something that I'm like, nope, never happens, never experienced that in my life, and that's not what the Bible says, or whatever, think about, is it possible? Is there any way that these things can be true at the same time? Maybe in a little bit different way than what you thought. So another reason why we suffer or make our suffering or our problems worse instead of dealing with them is avoidance coping. Oh, that writing is kind of small. I'm sorry, guys. Well, you're going to hear me talk about it, but avoidance coping is where we distract ourselves from the suffering instead of confronting the suffering and just dealing with the problem, right? So, there's some sort of suffering going on, you're in a unhealthy relationship, or you're not happy in your relationship anymore, or your boss just keeps piling on the work, or um, you need to start working out, something, right? Um, so we just throw a Band-Aid on it and we pretend like it's not there, and it just festers and festers and festers and festers and festers and festers, and eventually, all the things you avoid eventually will come to a head. And sometimes we do that on purpose because we're people pleasers. It's we don't want to hurt people's feelings. We don't want to cause a ruckus. We don't want to, you know, and so it almost like it takes us losing our temper, or it takes things coming to a head, or it takes the other person confronting us for us to then go ahead and have the hard conversation and deal with the suffering and confront the suffering. Because it's hard to have hard conversations when things are okay. so so we avoid it, right? We're just going to avoid it. Nina says, I've mastered that class, the avoidance. Yeah. So these are the ways, these are some ways of avoidance coping. So, number one, the biggest and most glaring example is substance use, right? And that's turning to alcohol, drugs, other substances to kind of numb your feelings, escape reality for a little bit. Um, Overuse, and I'm going to use that term lightly, but overuse of sex and porn and masturbation can be the same way. If you're using it to kind of put a salve on your suffering and your problems, like you get the endorphins, so you feel a little better for a while, that's avoidance coping. Okay. Procrastination, just putting it off, delaying it, and making decisions that allow you to avoid facing stress and getting things done, like putting off studying for an exam, right? Until the last possible second. Some of us with ADHD understand we do our best work when we procrastinate, but suffering does not need to be procrastinated. Okay. Denial is another form of avoidance coping. Hi, puppy. She's right here. Um, we just won't acknowledge it. We don't think about it. We just will not think about it. Compartmentalizing is a form of denial. We just put it in a box, put it in the back of the mind, and completely out of sight, out of mind. The difficulty is boxes leak, and the more you stack those boxes on each other, eventually they're going to pop open. The unfortunate part is you have all these boxes stacked in there, and then something happens that reminds you of these other things that are stacked up back there. And then all of the lids fly open and they're like, hey, we want you to think about us now too. So denial is terrible. Rocky says, I'm an alky, like an alchemist. Alcoholic. Okay, I see what you're saying. I've been to the ER 3 times this year due to withdrawals. Okay, twice in April. I did 3 days and 2 nights in there. Also about 3 weeks ago, and even did 35 days of rehab in May. Well, it's possible. And Rocky, obviously, I can't treat you, but I don't think it would ever hurt for somebody to look at the things that they're doing as possibly avoidance coping. And that maybe sometimes when all of us try to address our substance use or avoidance coping directly, maybe there's an underlying issue of suffering and pain and some emotional things that need to be dealt with. So just putting that out there. Hi, Leon. Thank you for being here. Next one is distraction. Like binge watching TV shows, scrolling through social media, excessively shopping, right? Just to take our mind off of the stress, right? Like you don't need to be in the suffering and constantly on it and thinking about it and overworking it and blah, blah, blah. You got to deal with it. So, but when we're using distractions instead of dealing with our problems, that's when it's avoidance coping. Overeating, also undereating, right? Using food to cope with emotions. They call it comfort food for good reason, because when we eat certain foods, it gives us comfort. So again, we're just like placating ourselves. We're putting salve on the suffering instead of dealing with it, doing the thing, ripping the Band-Aid off and getting on with life, right? We're just trying to avoid it. Fantasy lives and daydreaming, like escaping into imagined scenarios of idealized situations when everything is beautiful and wonderful. It's like we're constantly thinking about the other side of ripping the Band-Aid off instead of what we can do to rip the Band-Aid off. Social withdrawal, that's a biggie for me. Isolating from friends and family just to not people, avoid interactions that might bring up stressors, getting reminded of the stress that you're under and the suffering that you're avoiding. Hiding works. Okay. Blaming other people. We've talked about this recently. If you shift responsibility of why you're suffering onto other people instead of dealing with it or addressing these issues, then that is avoidance coping. Well, it's not my fault, it's their fault. I don't have any control. They have all the control. I can't do anything about it. They can do something about it. You know, I got an F in class because my teacher hates me, not because I didn't study. Don't we're not going to talk about that. You know, it's the forgetting salve. We're just going to forget I have any culpability or responsibility in this whatsoever. So let's talk about some different perspectives on suffering. We know what it is. We know why it's happening. We're avoiding it. We have cognitive dissonance. We're externalizing it. All of these things. We know what suffering is. We've all got it. Rocky says, I don't know how to deal with my emotions and problems. Well, I get that. And I think a lot of people can relate. Sometimes you got to go get a professional. And maybe it's time for that. Maybe a time for a lot of us to get a professional, especially when it's a little more, if you got too many boxes compartmentalized up in your mind, sometimes you don't want to just start throwing open the lids, you know what I mean? Just on your own. Sometimes a little help is nice. Leon says, yep, ADHD and playing Xbox and not studying. Then I look at the clock and say, another hour won't hurt. Cap alert. Adric says, donuts. Armando says, daydreaming, procrastination, isolating, and distraction. Guilty. Adrian says, shopping, eating, watching TV, compartmentalization. How many attacks I got to take in one show? Obviously, you are not the only one, right? And myself included, right? So let's look at suffering from some different perspectives. So there was a man named Viktor Frankl, and he was a psychologist, but he was also in a concentration camp. And so if you think about, as a psychologist and then you are put into a concentration camp, it's a lot to look at. And obviously psychologists tend to be a little more empathetic, so that's a lot to deal with, right? But and so he talks a lot about suffering, okay? When he said, he said, when we're no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. So if you've tried every way you can to fix the situation and the situation is not fixed, then you got to fix yourself. You got to do something about you, right? So Viktor Frankl, Holocaust survivor, psychologist, might have been a psychiatrist. Might have been a psychiatrist, actually, because I think he had an MD. So he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. Okay. He argues that suffering is inevitable. Kind of like we talked about, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. He says suffering is inevitable, but it's a catalyst for finding purpose in your life. So look at what you're suffering, look at what is painful, and that's how you find purpose and meaning, right? So his experience in the concentration camp taught him that those people who found meaning in their suffering while they were suffering were more likely to survive. They had more of a will to live. They didn't feel as hopeless and helpless. And these are people in a concentration camp. So, I mean, who are we? So Frankl said that meaning is a motivator, right? When you have a meaning or a purpose or a thing that you're working towards, that it gives you motivation for action, to move forward, to get up every day, right? It also helps us to cope with our suffering and adversity. It's sort of like when you find a purpose and you have to you have to endure some pain for it, you can put up with it for a while because you know that there's a meaning and a purpose behind that pain. Think about, hmm, you wanna run a 5K, right? Well, you may have to do a couch to 5K, because you don't run. And there's gonna be pain. You're gonna be sweaty, you're gonna be hot, your knees might hurt, and your muscles are gonna be real sore. And you're gonna be out of breath, and maybe your ribs hurt, like, especially, your first running, there's gonna be a lot of pain, but you have a purpose. There's a meaning in the pain. And so you put that pain towards that purpose. Okay. Um, So what he said was a lot of the sources of meaning have to do with love, faith, and a sense of duty, things like that. So you can survive harsh conditions. So he said those three things, love, faith, and a sense of duty, kind of come through some sources, three sources. Okay. So creative work. So engaging in some sort of creative expression that feels significant. And it doesn't have to just be art or poetry or what we think of when we think of art. It could be, I write, okay? And to me, that is a creative expression. Sometimes I draw when I really feel like I'm supposed to, but I'm not talented at that. I use drawing for a different means. It's more emotional expression. But I write, and that's creative, you know. Um, some people modify Hot Wheels. Some people do other things that are just creative, right? Um, the second source of meaning is love. So forming deep connections with others provides a sense of belonging and purpose and moving towards a common goal, right? You have a stated goal that you're moving towards. Um, and then meaning also comes from suffering. You're going to suffer things, whether that's through love, faith, or a sense of duty. There's going to be some suffering, right? So you have to transform that suffering into the meaning. Okay. Just like we talked about starting to run. That pain, no gain, right? That pain is moving towards that common goal. It's when you're suffering and you can find no meaning behind it, or you can find no goal. There's no end spot. It's not for a thing. It's for a vague. It's for a ghost. It's for a whisper. We don't know what it's for. It's for somebody else's benefit and you're not getting anything out of it, right? Then it's hard to find strength to endure. Hopefully you know what I mean. Adrian says, "Yep, you just talked me out of a 5K." Leon says 5Ks are not bad. It's what takes place after you sit down. That's rough. You gotta walk for a long time after a 5K. That's why I don't do marathons. Um, Armando says, "Is there such a thing as positive coping?" Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's stop for a second. So I'm not sure how much I got into coping because we're talking about meaning. So we're just going to stop for a second. Positive coping are things, there's buzzwords around it right now. It's like self-care, positive self-care and work-life balance. And, there's all the catchphrases, right? But positive coping are things that are beneficial. Okay. So it's sort of like you can use escapism a little bit, when you've been overthinking, when you've been working on things, you know, when you've put all a bunch of work in and it's the end of the day, you can binge watch some TV, that's positive. You can use some escapism, that's okay. But other things might be like, well, I like to cook and I need to stay busy and I need to keep my mind off of things. So I am just going to cook up a storm. I'm going to do a bunch of meal prep. Um, this is what I do on the weekends. And I'm going to make some new meals and I'm going to try out some new things. And I'm going to do all these meal preps so that I have all these lovely meals prepared for me. I'll have them in little single containers in the freezer. those things benefit me in the long run, right? Or it's beautiful outside and I need to just breathe. I just need to breathe. So I'm going to go walk a little bit. I'm going to be in the sunshine. I'm going to breathe. That walking, that oxygen, that sunshine, all of that benefits you in the long run. So it's sort of like if we're going to use positive coping, we on things that don't necessarily, they're sort of neutral. They aren't really bad and they aren't really great. Um, Moderation, right? Moderation with those little bits here and there, or rewards to ourselves, or taking a break, those kind of things. Um, or do things that will benefit you in the long run. Figure out things that you enjoy that will benefit you in the long run and do little bits of that. Okay. Armando says, didn't want to jump ahead. No, I get that. That's why I had to look like, did I talk about this? All right. So Viktor Frankl also talked about tragic optimism, which is like maintaining hope and finding meaning despite horrific suffering, loss, existential challenges. Why am I even alive? Why did we even live? Why are we even, um, you think about in the United States, um, similarly, uh, American descendants of slavery, look at everything that's gone on, right? Not just slavery, not just Jim Crow, not just redlining, not, but towns bombed, towns flooded, mass murders, mass lynchings, um, on and on and on and on. That's not what the show is about, but I just want to say as an example, right, that there's this optimism in the face of tragedy that creates this just such a robust and strong resilience. But sometimes we can wear our resilience as a crutch. Like, I know I'll be fine. I know I can do it. I'm just going to go work and work and work and work and John Henry myself right into a grave. Or, I'm just not going to feel this pain, not going to feel this pain, not going to feel this pain. I don't know why I have diabetes now. I don't know why I have heart disease now, right? Because we compartmentalize and stuff all these things down because we know we're resilient and we can do it and we can handle it and we can muster through. It's working inside. Okay. But that tragic optimism is just this huge resilience. It's like a superpower, but it's also kryptonite. Okay. He talked about existential vacuum. So Frankl warned against the existential vacuum, which is getting to a point of emptiness and lack of meaning where there's just no reason to live anymore. And especially in the face of a lot of oppression and degradation and things like that. You've heard of the saying, dying from a broken heart. There are people whose bodies will literally just start shutting down. Okay. So he said, you got to avoid that. Find meaning, right? It's almost like you have a responsibility to yourself to find meaning and then be authentic in that meaning. What you do needs to go towards that meaning, right? And if you find that there's things in your life that are holding you back from moving towards that meaning or asking you to wait before you can do the thing, like do them first, but I got thing over here, or absolutely just do not align with your meaning. You have to be authentic to yourself and say, okay, well, I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go do this thing, right? It's what eventually brings us joy and fulfillment. But that kind of circles back to you have to address the suffering. You gotta pull the band-aid off. Oh, I forgot to put up those 3 ways to find meaning. Sorry about that. All right. So Zen, I'm going to go into Zen beliefs a little bit on suffering. Okay. So Zen sort of believed embrace suffering to find enlightenment. Okay. Enlightenment being some absolute truths, some knowledge, right? So The Zen believe that suffering is a part of life, just like, I mean, it's all over the place. Suffering is a part of life. It's gonna happen. In the Zen practice, they tell you to embrace suffering as a way to understand life. Because if it's just gonna happen and it's part of being human, you embrace it, right? It helps you to find compassion toward yourself in the future and to other people. If you've never suffered, you've never experienced pain, you've never been put down, you've never failed, you've never struggled, like, we all know people like this, where they just obviously have never gone through a rough time and they just don't even know what they're so judgmental because they have no compassion for, screwing up, messing up your life, self-sabotage, hurting people's feelings, breakups, and, all that kind of stuff. You can tell. You've never been through it. Okay, so Zen said the nature of suffering is inherent, right? Now, Zen is a form of Buddhism. Okay, so that that it's part of life comes from Buddhism. Okay, it's unavoidable. So we're going to embrace it. Yay, I get to suffer, right? Um, Zen teaches that all things are impermanent and constantly changing. It's like this too shall pass. And but it's not just for suffering and pain. Like everything changes. So we hold on to the good stuff and we appreciate when things are hard because that means then we know when it feels good. If all we had was good, we wouldn't know bad, right? And if all we had was bad, we wouldn't know good. But we wouldn't know what good is without knowing bad, right? We would Good would just be every day. It would just be Tuesday. It doesn't matter. Okay. So this too shall pass. Everything is transient. We either catch on to the good that's right in front of us. We either go along and flow with the ride of life with, being who we are, how we are, with who we want to be with, because that's the life we get, or we waste our time avoiding pain, avoiding suffering, escapism, coping, all of these other things rather than doing the hard stuff to get to the good stuff. Okay. Um, Zen practice mindfulness, just being in the moment, fully present in the moment, even if you're suffering. They probably would let a mosquito bite them and then just sort of observe the mosquito. A monk, anyway. I don't know about everyone. Okay. Um, and then Zen said you got to accept pain as part of life. You can ease your own suffering. I mean, you're not like hurting yourself, but it's best when you have pain to try to figure out where it's coming from and what it is and deal with it, right? The Zen also teach about, like Stoicism, to detach. Don't take it personal. Don't take your suffering personal. Take it off of yourself, look at it, figure it out, deal with it, and get rid of it. Because it's not who you are as a person. It's your suffering, but it's not you. Armando says, no bug spray for me. They can tell me about their experience, right? I was listening to Ram Dass. So he used to be a psychologist, and then he kind of went through the spiritual revolution, and he talks about, he's very interested in this spiritual revolution. And so he's going around talking to different monks and trying to find a guru and, all these things. And so he's meditating, and they all make an agreement amongst each other. They're not going to move for 50 minutes, 50. They're not going to move. They're going to meditate for 50 minutes. And I don't remember where he was, Malaysia or somewhere. Anyway, so they're sitting and they're in their positions, and they go to sit down and you're like, got to get perfectly comfortable because I'm going to have to sit still for 50 minutes. So you're trying to make sure your legs and arms and everything is exactly right because the suffering is coming up, right? Like I'm prepping for the suffering, right? but they're doing it in a way to be able to acknowledge their suffering, deal with their suffering, and breathe through it and see that it passes. Even after you don't move, it still passes. Okay. So he gets in his position, they're all start they're doing the thing, everything's great, and he hears a mosquito. Now, he's trying to be this very enlightened, noble, compassionate man and, go through this spiritual ascension and all this kind of stuff. And he said, all I can think about is I really want this mosquito to land on somebody else. So here he's in this moment of trying to be transcendent, right? And he hears the bzz, bzz, and it's everywhere. And he just can't stand it, right? But they've all made this agreement. They're all gonna 50 minutes and they're gonna feel the pain, they're gonna attend to the pain, and the pain's gonna subside. This is what we're doing, right? Just being still. So wouldn't you know it, the mosquito lands on his cheek. And because he's so still, right? And everything's so quiet and he's so still and he's so attuned to his body. All of his focus goes right to his cheek, right where that mosquito is. And so all of the nerve endings, right where that mosquito, they just become super sensitive because all of his awareness goes right there. And so he's like, I could literally feel the sucker like stab into my skin as it went slower and slower into my flesh. And he's like, and I can feel it. And there's a little burning, and he's just, he's holding perfectly still. No, I can make this, I can make this. So eventually, the mosquito sort of drunk on blood staggers away and flies off. And he's like, you never know suffering until the itching starts. So that's what this reminds me of, right? That you can't take it personal, but man, when it's happening to you, it feels really personal. Adrian says, I bet he could hear him gulping as he drank. He probably could because his awareness was just so focused in on that spot, right? And then he talked about, the itching starts and he's just, his hands are shaking. Oh, I want to scratch so bad. And after just a few minutes, it just stopped itching. Right. And so it's sort of like you can attend to the suffering or you can let it go, but avoiding it does nothing. Yeah, Armando says, I so couldn't make it. Oh, God. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. So the Zen, they encourage seeing suffering as an opportunity for growth. Like anytime a suffering happens, there's something to be learned from it rather than viewing it as a negative experience. It's like what lesson can I get out of this? What did I need to learn? What did I need to hear? What do I need to go through? And the Zen would say that like if in your dating experience, maybe you keep dating the same person, but it's like you date somebody else, but you keep ending up with the same problems. Or like in your relationships with your friends, you keep ending up with the same problems. Or every time you need to advocate for yourself, you keep ending up with the same problems. you know, Zen, Buddhists, several people, several practitioners would say there's a lesson in there. And so the universe, being cyclical as it is going to keep bringing this problem back around until you deal with it. Okay. So learn the lesson, deal with the problem, pull the band aid off, right? Buddha said, grant me suffering that I may find compassion. So we talked about that you know, that it's hard to be compassionate if you've never suffered. But Buddha also said pain is inevitable and suffering is optional. Okay. Adric says, is the live blurry? I may have data issues. Yeah, you guys let me know. Let me know if it's blurry. Sometimes my connectivity is terrible. Um, so the last one I want to talk about is a book called the Upanishads. So this is ancient Hindu beliefs. I tend to err on the side of ancient things. I'm a little more holistic about beliefs, and the more documents get edited by, capitalism and corporate things and governments and things like that, I tend to go, I don't want to look at it. So the Upanishads, ancient Indian texts, talk about suffering and how it leads to a deeper understanding of the self, right? They encourage the seeker to view suffering as a means of spiritual awakening, guiding us towards our true nature, okay? Who we are as a person, right? We get more authentic in our suffering if we use our suffering in that way, right? Like it's part of the human condition. Again, that's what they all say. And it's interesting because in the Upanishads they call suffering dukkha, and that makes me think it's dookie. So, but it's an intrinsic part of life, right? It's part of the cycle of life, birth, death, rebirth on the other side, whatever that looks like. Now, what it says in the Upanishads is that suffering is often attributed to ignorance of self. Sort of like the less authentic you are, the more you're going to suffer a thing or a situation or a person. It's like you're constantly, oh, that person, oh, they're so annoying, oh, this, oh, I'm mad about that, oh, blah, 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 blah. But what I have found is the more you try to grow as a person, because life is cyclical, sometimes life has to take those same problems and bring them back around to you and go, now, are you sure that you handled this? Are you sure you learned your lesson? And you got to kind of do it one more time. So usually got one more test even after the ignorance kind of leaves. But this is essentially ignorance of self is what creates or opens the door to suffering. Okay. They also talk about the role of desire. Desire is the source of suffering, right? Like an attachment to worldly desires because everything is transient, right? So then we're dissatisfied. I don't have enough money. I don't have the right car. I don't have the right person on my arm. I don't have the right clothes. I don't look the right way. I need more money for this and more money for that. And I want more things and more stuff and more junk and have. And so we're constantly dissatisfied because we're never satisfied with how much we have. Okay. So the Upanishads expound lengthy on the relationship between the individual self and your ultimate self, or like your ascended self, your higher self, right? Like the perfect you or the goal that you're moving towards. And what we have to do to ease our suffering is to realize that's not a straight line. There's not really distance between those two things. There's just some actions. I just got to do some stuff. I'm still that person. I just got to do some stuff. So they talk about ethical living. They talk about, they hit a lot on you can ease suffering for yourself and others through liberation. They call it moksha. Um, Liberation is about self realization and then discovering the unity and connectivity and collectivity of all humanity. And so, you not only ease your own suffering, but you ease the suffering of others. So, a great example of this, and I just love this art picture. It was so cute. Is Nelson Mandela. If you guys don't know who Nelson Mandela is, he was born in the early 1900s in South Africa. This it was deeply segregated. It was very much in the midst of apartheid, and he became involved in the African National Congress, which fought against racial oppression. Okay. So he was arrested, convicted, and went to prison under sabotage was his charge. Sabotage, right? He was sentenced to life. He spent 27 years in prison on an island, right? And despite this brutality of his incarceration, when he came out, he continued his education. He cultivated a strong sense of purpose. He was a leader amongst the inmates and then became a leader, the leader, right? When he was released. So so he got out in 1990. So he was sentenced in 1962. He got out in 1990. His release was really a turning point in the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, right? So he is crucial. 1994, he was South Africa's first Black president in the country's first multiracial election, right? So all this time he's in prison, he's suffering, he could have gave up, he could have become hopeless, he could have done all of these things, but he was resilient and he maintained his purpose. He found his purpose before he went in and kept his purpose. I'm sorry, Adric, nobody wants to answer you about whether the live is blurry. Maybe everybody's just listening and not watching. All right. So even after Mandela's term as president, he just continued advocacy, talking, networking with people. He really had a commitment to justice and reconciliation, right? He wanted to change the course of that country, you know? So he is a great example of that. You can use your suffering as a purpose, but you're going to have to address it. And he addressed not only his, but everybody else that he was imprisoned with, right? So we can get a lot of personal growth from suffering, you know, from Viktor Frankl's insights about finding meaning in your suffering to Zen teachings, you know, that it's inevitable, and the wisdom of the Upanishads, the inspiration of Nelson Mandela, of course. Embracing your suffering, handling your business, having the hard conversation, have the conflict, do the thing, rip the Band-Aid off, can help us find true meaning and authenticity in our life. All right, guys. You ready to get weird? Now is when we can stop pretending to be normal. Whoop, whoop. It's the fun time, right? It's the fun time. All right. So my question is suffering an activation? Does it activate a superpower? Is it like a red pill? If you suffer enough? Is it like, you know, Neo's suffering, where he's suffering so much that it kind of red pills him out? Or after the red pill, right? Like the suffering is being flushed out of the matrix, right? And so if the initial suffering is the red pill and then Neo gets flushed out, then he has to suffer more, right? Because think about it. He couldn't walk, he couldn't move, he had no strength. He's just a little piddly pale thing. And, you know, he had to work and work and work to address his suffering. And then he ends up being the hero, you know? So is suffering like the radioactive spider that can open up your superpower? Because again, we don't want to stay in the suffering. We got to address the suffering. So we talk about Neo being flushed out of the matrix is the suffering, right? The initial suffering is the red pill, and then he spends all this time addressing it. If you were to just ignore it and compartmentalize it and try to escape from it, that means you put both hands and feet out in the tube as you're being flushed out of the matrix, and you're just staying right there. I'm staying right here. I don't want to deal with the suffering. Here's remember those when you slides as kids, right? So what we do know is that suffering builds resilience. We just talked about that. I mean, nobody wants to suffer. I'm not wishing suffering on anybody, but suffering creates resilience. And the more suffering, the more resilience. It's a superpower at some point. right? Because, and I say super in that it's higher than the average person. So it's super, it's extraordinary, it's extra powerful, it's a super power, right? Um, Leon says the initial suffering is unknown, the rage is known. Ebony Knight, hi, thanks for being here. Says suffering is a part of the hero's journey. Absolutely. Inspired Truth says suffering is the fire that burns away the impurities. I like that. Adrix says clogged in the tube. Nina says suffering wakes you up to your humanity. Yeah. Yeah. But doesn't it, in a way, can't suffering wake you up to the matrix? Or that everything you thought is actually not true? You know, we were taught if you work hard and you go to school and you're a nice person, then you're going to meet another nice person and you're going to have these nice kids and life's going to be lovely and you're going to walk arm in arm with a little stroller and be the happiest bunch of hilarious MFers in the whole neighborhood. And you get to a certain point where you're like, I've been suffering. And none of that was real. Right? And so it can be kind of the red pill, right? And you got to figure out, are you going to address the suffering and come all the way out of the tube? Or are you just going to put all your hands and feet out and be like, I don't want it? Because the superpowers are on the other side. So resilience was one, empathy and compassion, right? The Buddhist prayer, grant me suffering so that I may find compassion, right? The more suffering you've been through, the more trauma you've been through. Again, I don't wish it on anybody, but you end up with this like superpower, this like hypersensitive radar of empathy where you can put yourself in somebody's shoes just like that. You can understand how people feel. You can look at things from different points of view real easily. Adric's trying to go back in the matrix, guys. So he's saying don't take the red pill. So you have enhanced resilience, you have enhanced empathy, and enhanced problem solving skills. So, like, research has even shown that people who have been traumatized have much higher levels of problem solving skills than the average person. You're just better at solving problems. You learned from it. You're better at solving problems. Increased intuition. We just talked about that. That goes along with empathy, finding purpose and meaning, right? Now, right? Like now I'm a superhero. I have this meaning, I have this purpose, I have this thing I'm going to do. And because I know I'm resilient, I'm going to try it. You know, I'm going to jump in. Okay. Um, Throughout our entire history, creative genius, be it songs, music, art, movie, plays, all kinds of when that creative genius, that stuff that just hits you right in the gut, doesn't it always come from suffering? Even love songs don't hit you as hard as the songs about having survived deep pain, right? So this creative genius comes away from that. You get what I'm saying? Okay. Leon says Kabbalah was my first understanding of red pill, not women. Yeah, I get that. I get that. So I want you guys to kind of think about that, and hopefully that's a different paradigm for suffering because again, we don't want to avoid it. If you think about how it's like being stuck in the tube in the matrix, you can't climb back up. You can't unsuffer the suffering. So you might as well just say "we" and slide on out the tube and go ahead and get your superpowers. Right? Address it, do the thing. Okay, it's superpowers. There are positive things on the other side of attending to the suffering. Okay, tinfoil hat warning, right? And remember, tinfoil hats are talking about governmental conspiracies. And hey, YouTube, by the way, this is just for fun. It's silly. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. It's haha, it's just jokes, right? So, what I want to talk about here is about being forced to suffer. Right? So we did talk about American descendants of slavery, right? And the suffering that they went through, but at the hands of Hmm. So it seems at times that the government purposely maintains a state of suffering and more suffering for some people than for others. But in general, it's suffering for most in some way. Some of it is, more like an itchy fingernail bed. And for some people, it's like this gentleman sitting on the bench, right? How do you compare them? I'm not sure. But it seems as if the government purposefully maintains a state of suffering. And why would they do that? So I'm going to talk about some reasons. Um, Economic equality is one of the things that is used to maintain a state of suffering. There's wealth disparity, right? There's significant suffering in lower socioeconomic classes, limited access to resources, education, job opportunities, and all of that perpetuates a cycle of poverty, precarious employment. Most people in low income brackets work in low wage, unstable jobs without benefits. So they're financially insecure and they're under chronic stress. And all of this thing is a cycle and keeps going and going and going. And there's relatively simple ways to fix it, but they just don't. They allow the wealth gap and the wealth disparity and precarious employment to continue on and on unabated. Wonder why they do that. Access to healthcare is another one. And we have healthcare inequalities and inequities. Quality healthcare is tied to employment or wealth. If you don't have good employment and you don't have wealth, you don't get healthcare, right? Another easy fix, but there's more suffering for people without health insurance, particularly among marginalized communities, than the mental health stigma. You know, societal stigmas around mental health prevent individuals from seeking help, then we're suffering more. Um, Education disparities, inequitable education system, right? Children in lower socioeconomic areas attend underfunded schools. And why is that? Because they set it up to where the funding for the schools is based on the property taxes. Well, if you have 20 homes that are worth $5,000 versus 20 homes that are worth $20 million, how much money is the school getting? See what I'm saying? Easy fix, but they don't, right? They just keep it going. Individualism, it's a biggie for me. Western cultures prioritize individuals over communities, leading to social isolation. Then we're all feeling lonely, depressed, withdrawn. And this is particularly true of vulnerable populations, like the elderly, people who are infirm or disabled, and then living in this sort of individualistic meritocracy that we're in. Then this gentleman who's sitting on the bench is all alone, and people can't even see him. They don't see him. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people just, it's not ignore. Like, I think literally they can't see them anymore. It's wild. Hi, Cutting Up with Joneses. Thank you for being here. So that hyper individualism, me, 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 me. It's all about me, and I'm going to step on everybody to get mine. And, you know, why does society promote that? Right? It seems like they're purposefully trying to make us alone and by ourselves, like picking us off from one another, right? So then we have consumerism. Our society promotes consumerism, which that equates self-worth with material possessions. Again, I talked about that just a little bit ago, right? Like, if I don't have the money and the car and the this and the that and the house and yada, 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 then I'm not good enough, right? Like, somehow my car is a statement of my character as a person, right? Isn't that wild if you think about that logically? Like, that literally makes no sense. It just creates more suffering because I constantly want, and I constantly have to buy, right? On top of that, then you turn on the news, you watch the media, you get online, and it's constant fear mongering and catastrophizing. And the news is telling you, like, all these terrible things are going to happen. And look at all these terrible things and this terrible thing and that terrible thing. And it's all going to, And of course there are terrible things going on in the world, but the news also like really exaggerates crime in certain areas and certain things like that to utilize fear mongering against us. Um, okay, then we have government policies that seem to try to perpetuate suffering. So we have inadequate welfare support. For instance, single fathers try to be a single father and get um, food stamps. What do they call those anymore? EBTs or SNAP cards, those kind of things. Like that's just one. That's just one example I'm throwing out, right? There really is inadequate support, right? It on some levels, welfare can become a crutch, right? Because other supports aren't there. We're just going to throw money at you about for food. Now fix yourself, you know? um, that social services network and social support system is just it's not there's no equity in it whatsoever, right? There's no resources to cope with hardships at all. You just got money on your stop card to go buy Doritos, much better than starving to death, but it really doesn't help long term. Okay. Criminalizing poverty. This is a big one that makes me go, they just want us to suffer more. Like, it's illegal to put a tent up when you're homeless. Um, Vagrancy laws, loitering, trespassing, um, starving and stealing food, um, growing food outside without permission or within inside city limits, littering, public defecation, it goes on and on and on. Anything about being indigent or homeless or in poverty is criminal. And then what do? They arrest you, they put you in jail, then you got to go to court. Now you owe court fines. With what? Right? And you just get more and more and more in debt to the state. Okay. So being poor is now criminal. Okay. This mostly affects low income communities, of course, mostly affects racial and ethnic minorities, historically has been ADOS people, because you add in the systemic racism and all that entails, right? Single parents struggle, men and women, disabled individuals, the elderly, like it affects all these people. And yet it just keeps happening. We have a presidential election coming up, and is anybody, is either one of them committed to fixing this stuff? We don't even ask about homelessness in the debate anymore, do we? We don't. Nobody cares anymore. They don't see him. They just don't see him. So, seems like the government's perpetuating suffering. Why would they do that? Well, number one, there's economic interests that are part of that. I talk about how the way that our system works, to have the ultra rich, you have to have the ultra destitute. Okay, so if the ultra rich have $10 trillion amongst them, you have to have the amount of human capital that's worth $20 trillion on the other end of that teeter-totter to balance it out. Okay, so there are economic interests to keeping suffering, right? Profit maximization. Okay. Corporations profit from a labor force that is desperate for a job. I'm going to say it again. Corporations benefit from a labor force that is desperate for a job. So they can pay lower wages, they can reduce costs, they can make more money, so they can exploit workers. And the workers just have to stay in it, right? They got to stay in the unfavorable conditions because they're desperate for a job and everything is expensive. So, of course, they want you suffering a little bit. They want you desperate for a job. Consumerism, a culture that promotes consumption can keep people focused on material gain rather than systemic issues. A culture that promotes consumption can keep people focused on material gain rather than addressing systemic issues. This hyper individualized, right? Well, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps, so can they. If they can't make it, that's their problem. I got money. I got mine. Hmm, right? We have political control, disempowerment. Keeping certain populations in a state of suffering limits their political power. When people are preoccupied with survival, how many of those homeless folks do you think are really concerned about the election? They do not give a hoot. We don't even ask them. Like there's a mental status exam, and one of the questions is, who is the president? I don't ask any of the homeless people who's president because sometimes they'll be like, I don't know. Survival, right? But people who are preoccupied with survival type things on a day to day are less likely to organize and advocate for change. It's hard to have the strength to organize and advocate for change when you're trying to get enough hours in today to stop at the grocery store and buy the things you need to try to get a couple meals out of the groceries. You see what I'm saying? And you're trying to figure out how do you keep the lights on, and you can't do a payment arrangement with your water anymore, right? Fear is a tool. Governments use fear to maintain control. They want to perpetuate a sense of danger or instability that justifies oppressive policies, actions, and keeping the populace compliant. Just look again at the presidential election. It's a lot of catastrophizing and fear mongering, and we've seen before about how the government will kind of stir everybody up and get them really scared so that they can push through specific policies. Leon said, she literally said, I am a capitalist for the middle class. Wait, who said that? Adric says, only conversation about the middle class. RIP Jordan Neely. Adrian says they're not interested in the poor because one guy is rich and the other lady grew up in a middle class family. Oh, that's who. Okay. She said that 975,000 times that she grew up in a middle class family. Yes. Right. And they wouldn't know. They wouldn't know poor. Either one of them wouldn't know poor. So why else do they do it? Class divisions. They need the caste system. They need the caste system to work, right? We have to have an ingrained class structure for the ultra rich to stay ultra rich. They don't want to disrupt their status, their privilege. They need policies that sustain inequality. They need them to stay rich. Systemic racism and discrimination justifies unequal treatment of certain groups. If you maintain that in the caste system, then the only solidarity that oppressed groups get is from each other. And when all the power, all this supposed power in a capitalist society is taken, and we're so consumerist and we're so hyper individualized, we think, oh, we have no power, we can't do anything, because that's what they told you. That's what they want you to think. Right? So they keep the class system going, they keep all the propaganda going. They tell you, well, you can't do anything because you don't have enough money. Societal narratives always blame the victim, right? Rather than addressing the problem. We've kind of normalized suffering. Life is hard. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Work hard. It's not how hard you're hit, or not how many times you're hit. It's how many times you get up. It's, like that's our success stories, is how much you can get your ASS beat and still make it. And then side note, you die of a heart attack at 64. But that's okay because you worked really hard and you made a lot of money for some very wealthy people, right? We also have established systems and institutions will resist change because of bureaucratic inertia. So even when policies and procedures and guidances and the way things have been done are outdated, it's that this is the way we've always done it. So they're just going to keep doing it, you know. We have cognitive dissonance, of course, just with the general population, but also desensitization. Like I was just talking about with you can't even see homeless people on the street anymore. We don't even ask about homelessness with our presidential candidates anymore. It's like, meh, we've moved on to school shootings and whatnot. Well, they never fixed the homelessness. So, they figure they don't have to because you're eventually going to stop asking. Right? So I want you to think about that our society has a utilitarian perspective, right? Policies are enacted based on calculations of cost benefit analysis, benefits versus cost, right? And it will always be at the expense of a marginalized group. So they do the cost benefit analysis. They want to benefit the most and have it cost them the least. So there has to be an opposite side of that for that to happen. Then there has to be a group of people who it costs the most for them and they benefit the least. Do you see what I'm saying? And so they want to keep the system in place, which that means suffering is baked into the sauce, right? It's a nice Chicago deep dish. This is baked into the sauce. All right. So what do? I don't want to leave you feeling, destitute. We need to utilize a new paradigm with new skills and ability gained from suffering, right? Like I just told you, these are superpowers, extra powers, above normal powers that you have now. So use them, do the inner work, be honest, figure out what your goals are, figure out where you're going. Don't just exist. Don't avoid, all of those things. Adrian Hicks says Bacon's Rebellion 2.0. We're working on it. Find a collective of people. Find your people, find your tribe, get a plan. Be a good steward to yourself. Offer yourself some grace. Be a good steward to other people. Be a good steward to the earth. Strive for balance and authenticity. Always, I'm always going to say balance and authenticity, right? But I think these are important things. And I think eventually, there's probably going to be plans for these things because people have had enough. All right. I want to thank my live tribe. Of course, thanking the replay gang as well. Obviously. Hello. But the live tribe, you were here today. I appreciate it. Love it when you guys have conversation with me. Helps me know I'm not speaking into the void. Shout out to the replay gang who are watching on the other side of this. Appreciate you guys too. Leave comments where you can. I love reading your guys' comments. I read every single one of them, by the way. I hope Leon says the government is fear-mongering with a strike with the union. Maybe. There's some weird stuff going on. Anyway, I hope you guys have a good Wednesday. Upcoming shows. This coming Sunday is our men's dating preferences shallow. That's going to be the Sunday show. And then next Wednesday is the important questions when emerging from the matrix. So that one should be pretty interesting. All right, I'm going to show you guys a picture of my dog. Bye. Please like the video if you haven't already. It really helps the algorithm to know what kind of things you like. Share where you think it's appropriate, especially to someone who you think needs to hear it. And don't forget to check out some of the wilder Pivot Point Wednesday shows. And last, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. especially if you want to break down complex concepts that make the esoteric not so teric, helping you on your journey to become your most authentic self. By subscribing, you'll join a community that thrives on curiosity and growth, and you'll never miss out on insights and some wild discussions. Let's uncover the universe together. Bye.